Welcome everyone. We are here with our pre-recorded lecture on variables. We started talking a little bit about what variables are already, and most of what is in chapter 6, which is the variable chapter. By the way, variable chapter, I'm going to give it, an A-, maybe a B+. It's a very good chapter. If there's any chapter you haven't checked out yet, start with chapter 6. It's pretty good. That's where we are in your text, and we talked again about variables this past week, and I've started building out the module on variables for you. So we're going to continue that today, and a lot of the things we're talking about are going to be review from COMM420. So let's get started and see what variables are. I just find it very simply here that a variable is any concept. Communication apprehension is a variable. Verbal aggressiveness is a variable. Gender is a variable. Employment is a variable. Any concept that you can measure. So anytime we talk about variables, it's all kinds of different concepts that are out there that we measure or say influence or impact. Along with that influence and impact, we have independent, dependent. These are really easy, but a lot of people want to make them confusing, and they're just not. Okay, the independent variable is a variable that influences. It changes something in another variable. It does the influencing. The dependent variable is the outcome. That's the variable that's changed by the independent variable. Okay, so I always think of dependent as outcome. What is it that the outcome is, and what variables do you think are going to change or impact that outcome? So if you take distance learning, for example, distance learning is the dependent variable. What kinds of things do you think will impact someone's distance learning experience? So that's what we're looking at. And we're going to continue. Don't worry, I've got lots of examples and an activity for you as well. I do give you an example down here. Great question, I thought. Love to research this myself because it's a fascinating phenomenon. It says, what is the relationship between parents who engage in verbally aggressive behavior at sporting events and a child's verbal aggressiveness? So what we are manipulating is parents who either do or don't. That's the independent. The outcome is what effect do those two different situations have on a child's verbal aggressiveness? This fascinated me because, of course, some of you may know Kevin played soccer from day one, like out of the womb all the way through high school. So I was a soccer mom, and I went to a shitload of soccer games, and I heard a lot of crap talk, mostly from the parents. They are bad, let me tell you. So it would be fascinating to see if you had parents who were yelling and screaming and doing all that on the sidelines. Did that affect your own child's verbal aggressiveness, or even other children? But if you were a parent like me, I sat back, drank my coffee, and just laughed at all the other stupid parents yelling their fool heads off. I don't think my child's verbally aggressive either. He's pretty laid back. But it was always fascinating to kind of see that behavior at soccer games every weekend. So the parents who engage in verbally aggressive behavior, what is the effect of that behavior on your child's aggressiveness? A child aggressiveness is the outcome. Don't worry, we're going to keep practicing, but it's really quite simple, and I think you'll pick up on it. Here's another variables question that I put up here. Communication satisfaction with parents will be lower among children from divorced families than among children from intact families. Okay, so right away, I've got two different groups. You can either have a divorced family or an intact family. So I can manipulate which one. So that's screaming independent variable. And I want to know how that changes communication satisfaction, the outcome, or the dependent variable. Anytime almost that you see the word, and I think I talked with you about this in 350, satisfaction or something overall, again, that's the end, the outcome. And you want to know what things do you think affect that outcome. So as you're thinking about your research topic and you think, well, what kinds of things would change X? And those are your independent variables. You can have multiple independent variables in a study. You could conceivably have multiple dependent variables. So again, keep going there with me. Variable levels. Not all variables are the same. We talked about this, and let's kind of go back through it. Nominal variables are simply a category. It's a check mark. And that was things like sex, male, female, unemployment or employment status. You're either employed, unemployed. We talked about blood type. Blood type is a check. Mine's A plus because, I'm the teacher. So you're checking a category. So that's a nominal level variable. And the reason we care about this is because we can only do so much statistical analysis with a nominal level variable. It doesn't tell us too much because it's just a category. Ordinal variables give us a little more information. They rank order things. So basically, we talk about a horse race, first, second, third place. Anytime you rank something in order, it's an ordinal variable. And again, it limits what we're allowed to do with that statistically. We are going to spend most of our time in interval. And what this means is you're typically using a survey with multiple questions to make up the measurement for the variable. It's not just a check mark. You now have to answer several questions so that you get your level of communication apprehension. So in this interval, it represents equal distances between levels within each category. What that means, and it's going to become really important for us, is how we look at things on surveys. Okay? Basically, when you have surveys, and we're going to get into some different types of surveys, you typically have a distance, rank it 1 to 5. And what we want to know is what are the equal distances between that, and are they equal? And that's what we're looking at. So I'm going to flip over right now to your module and talk a little bit about those intervals or those levels. I've put a handout up here that should help you, and it is the Likert or Likert, you can say it Likert response alternatives for 5 questions. In the research world, we do like 1 to 5. You can probably use 1 to 7. You can use all kinds of different scales. We are in now talking about surveys and scales. This is equal. This is one of the reasons you also wouldn't use 4. There's 1 to 4. I hate when people do that because it doesn't give you a middle. So here are some different ways you can change questionnaires. We have things like very often to never, very positive, excellent, very good, fair, poor. These are the levels that you might respond to a question. So when you have a question, it says, how satisfied are you with Zoom learning at SDSU? How satisfied? Completely satisfied, mostly unsure, mostly dissatisfied, completely dissatisfied. This is interval because for one question, remember now you have 5 different equal choices. That's the difference. If it's ordinal or nominal, I just check a box. It's not showing me something on a scale that has more choice. So that's what we're looking at when we look at scales, that interval level. Those are parts that make up the survey. So, I just played from current slide. Good. Ratio are interval variables as well, but with a true 0. We're going to come back and talk about this a whole lot more in the measurement chapter. What I need you to just know right now, I'm going to explain it more when we get into measurement and statistics, is that based on whether your variable is nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio, it allows us to do different statistical analysis of the variable. So leave it at that. Say, I know that based on the level of my variable, I can do different statistical analysis. So what happens is a lot of times you only pick categorical. How does gender affect employment? I can't really do much with that because it's 2 nominal variables. There's no levels for me to look at or score or get into deeper analysis with. So again, a Likert or Likert, I don't even get me into the stupid debate on how to pronounce this. It can be pronounced both ways just fine. The Likert scale is a pre-numbered scale with multiple statements. All Likert scales are going to be interval data. So I just showed you that handout that gave you a lot of different responses. This is a Likert type scale, and anything that gives you these multiple intervals to measure is interval data. So you've got a lot of them in that module I gave you. We're going to start pulling up surveys, and this is where I'm actually going to start explaining different things to you, because there's all kinds of different surveys out there, and there's different scales. Now let's look at this. This is a family communication standards instrument. And a lot of you are interested in family, so you're going to be using this survey. One of the first things I would tell you to do is to cut this scale down to only a 1 to 5. That's just going to be better and easier for statistical analysis. But this scale is going from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And we would cut that down. This is an interval level instrument because, again, it has equal distance options to answer the questions. It's not a yes or no. Can you talk openly with one another about any topic? No. And once you hit the no, there's no, I can't get an average from that. If everyone answered this first question about their family, I could come up with an average of the whole class about how they generally feel about open communication with their family. If it's just yes or no, I can still come up with an average, but it would be something like 20 people said no and 50 people said yes. And what happens when you just have yes or no questions is you're forcing people into what we call a false dichotomy. So a lot of people hate that because nothing is really yes or no. And certainly we get stuck. They often found in political polls, when they asked people a yes or no question, their statistics were very biased. 40% of the people said, yes, I'm going to vote for Trump. But they didn't actually give them any other option but yes or no. What if they gave them the option of maybe? That number could change significantly. Or I don't know, or I don't care. You see, so the more interval level data we have, we can get more refined information that more appropriately gets at what the audience is thinking and saying. So this is a great scale, how you express affection. We do not hug in my family. That's a 1. I know, I need more affection. Politeness, discipline, this is a great scale here. We have the family communication satisfaction scale, and this one's interesting because you're like, where's the scale? You would probably want to do, again, a 1 to 5, strongly agree to strongly disagree. And that's sometimes where we have to go in and change the wording and change the measures, and we can do that. That's okay. Look at this. These anchors are different. Not true of me at all. Extremely true of me. This is the fear of missing out scale, and some of you might want to use that one as well. We have introvert, extrovert here. This one's interesting. We're going to have to rewrite this if you want to use this, because they've just got a check mark. And again, if we just check, that's nominal data. So we're going to want to actually put a scale 1 to 5 using some response alternatives out here on this so we can get more in-depth data. And I will show you how to do that. Group atmosphere. This is a group atmosphere scale. And again, not real happy with it. First of all, it doesn't give me any key. Is this strongly agree to strongly disagree? And I would immediately cut this scale right down to 5 right from the start. This is a pretty good one. It's actually gave me the scale, strongly agree to strongly disagree. And certainly this is a Likert scale. There are most surveys you're going to see. This is interpersonal communication competence, 1 to 5, basic scale. These are all interval levels, okay? This is the interpersonal power inventory, which deals with some work-related issues. The influence inventory is a little different. We'll talk about that, etc. All right, let me go back to the PowerPoint and keep us going here. so I don't get too sidetracked or I get excited about scales. So a Likert scale deals with interval ratio data. Okay, if you have a Likert scale, by the fact that you've got these equidistant choices, you're dealing with interval or ratio data. Now, you can have a semantic differential scale, my friends, a series of adjectives that are oppositely worded. This is a different type of scale, but still interval level or ratio level data. And here's why. We still are making a choice. So we are in our modules. Let me go ahead to modules. And I'm actually going to pull up the Red Shelf textbook. Go figure. So, oh no, noodles, wrong textbook. Almost said a bad word too. Let's go ahead and start reading. Now, in here in chapter 6, they give you a difference on some of these ways of looking at things. I just want to go straight to page 186. So 186, go. Let's see if it does it. Boom, so excited. All right, here's a semantic differential. So again, this is why I said chapter 6 is actually really freaking helpful. The Likert scale, here's your numbered statements, and here's the equidistant choices. This is what we call a semantic differentiation scale, and it is paired with adjectives that are the opposite, and you rank. So it's still interval. I know I said the word rank, but it's interval because these are equal distance, okay? So you're getting a more equidistant type of response. Are you completely unmotivated or totally motivated? So it's still interview data, but you're getting adjectives that are the opposite. That's a semantic differential scale. There is also something called a staple scale, and there are some of these in the COMM world out there. So I wanted you to be familiar with what a staple scale looks at. This is interesting. This is still interval level data, okay? And this is how anxious are you about, was this about doing homework? There's actually, I think it's the infidelity scale that uses a scaleogram, and it's like, how likely do you think your partner is to cheat on you? And, -5, not at all, +5, yeah, man, they're doing it right now. So these are words that have, instead of, they have the negative and the positive where you can rate those. They do give you the ratio, the true zero. And this is a different way we add up scores. This is now where for each phrase, circle whether you agree with the statement by circling yes or disagree with the statement. And they've assigned them numbers to calculate. So this one, it's still out there. It's something we would use, and we're still basically using numbers. I don't want to get into these types of scales. So it goes and talks about choosing the right test. Differences of relationship, 2 groups, more than 2 groups, 2 variables, more than 2 variables. This is where we want to be. Do you see? And then I can do a bunch of different statistical tests. Ordinal, we can still test some differences in relationships, but to be honest, again, we can't look at groups here really, and it just diminishes our power to do statistical analysis. That's what you need to know, all right? Just that it diminishes our power to do statistical analysis when we only have nominal or ordinal data. We can do a lot more statistical analysis with interval or ratio. Interval or ratio data, again, usually has multiple questions addressing one concept with varying levels in between about how you feel. All right, that being said, let's keep going before I bore you to death. The rest of chapter 6, again, great chapter. It goes through some common variables, and it even puts them into the categories. Some nominal type variables that you will want to ask: biological sex, political affiliation, employment status, ethnicity, marital status. These are all check boxes, and we still want them. They're still going to give us good information, but we need other variables as well. Some ordinal variables you might look at are university level, freshman, senior, like that. Time spent online, 10 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours, anything in time is ordinal. And then interval. Remember, we are going to include some nominal, maybe some ordinal, but we are mostly dealing with interval level variables because these are the concepts that have multiple questions assessing one concept. The more questions, this is really key, the more questions you have assessing a concept, the more accurate the answers are going to be. So, let's go back to that chapter that we are in. The more questions I ask you about homogeneity, I have 10 questions just measuring this one concept. Now, if I only had 5, would I get as accurate of an answer? No. 10 questions gives me a pretty good idea of how you feel about this concept. Because we're asking more questions. The more questions you ask, the better your data is going to be. So they go through these variables. Remember, these are interval variables, and a lot of these are things, again, that are full surveys. And they give you lots of links in here about different variables you might use. Here's the communication apprehension. So I'm not measuring your communication apprehension with just 5 questions and saying, yep, you're high apprehension, man. You're going to suck at public speaking. Look at this, 24 different questions with a 1 to 5 range. I'm going to come up with some pretty good scores that are probably pretty accurate about how you feel about speaking in public. And generally, the PRCA has a very, very high reliability rate, so that if you score an 80 on it, you probably have some anxiety. Now, when you get scales that are using so many questions to address one concept, what happens is they're usually hiding sub-concepts or sub-variables or other variables within that scale. Keep going with you. Group discussion, meetings, interpersonal and public. So they're actually measuring 4 other variables within this one variable of communication apprehension. Do not let that bother you because we're going to be talking more about that. That's a great thing. That gives us even more information. So let me ask you a trick question right now. How many questions do you need to measure something, in a valid way? Can I only have 1 question on it, or am I back to a different level of data? It's an excellent question. Thank you for asking. All right, so we do have standards, and you need to have at minimum 3 questions to measure a variable or a concept. A minimum of 3 questions. I like to see 5. You can see here, they tell you the scores 2, 4, and 6, and 1, 3, and 5. So those are all looking at how your anxiety and group discussion. So they've got 6 questions, and I think that's a good amount. All right, hopefully that makes sense. We're going to be getting into that a little bit more. Not all scales do that, but some of them you will see you get subscales, and we're going to be talking a lot about subscales because they're embedded in a lot of scales. And look at this chapter is just full of them. Now look at this. This is the willingness to communicate. It's 20 questions, but it's measuring 7 different concepts. It's measuring your willingness for group discussion, discussion in meetings, interpersonal, public speaking with strangers, with acquaintances, and with friends. So you will get all this information from these 20 questions. So you've actually got 8 variables there. Your overall willingness to communicate, and then 7 sub-variables about your willingness to communicate in these particular situations. Don't worry about this too much. I want you to see it, and I'm going to walk you through building your survey and how to deal with this. Now you're seeing some different types of scales. We're moving into ratio variables. We are going to stay away from these. Again, I want us to stay in interval land. Interval is what we use the most and gives us the most rich data. All right, so another little review for you after variables is research questions and hypotheses. All right, you want to put these variables obviously in your research question or your hypotheses, and you want to make predictions about what you think will have an impact on that dependent variable. And this is where I want you to have at least 3 interval level variables. That means they have a scale, multiple questions addressing that one concept. So a hypothesis, as you know, it's a statement about a relationship between an independent and a dependent variable. And we must be able to test it. We talked about these in 350. You have a one-tailed, a hypothesis that predicts the specific nature. It tells us the direction we think that it's going to impact. So I give you the example, a positive relationship exists between people listening style and conversational sensitivity. I'm already telling you it's going to be positive one way. Now, if I say, I don't know if it's going to be positive or negative, but I know it's going to result in some difference, then I want to say it's two-tailed. We just say there's going to be a difference, but I don't know in which direction. So lecturers using interest-based examples should result in different scores on cognitive recall tests. I don't know if it's going to result in more positive or more negative scores, higher scores or lower scores. I'm just saying that there should be a difference. And that's a two-tailed. It can go either way. Now, you also have the null hypothesis, and it is an expression of no difference or no relationship whatsoever. And these are really pretty much always worded the same way. There is no relationship between communication apprehension, that's what CA is affectionately called in the discipline, and individuals' belief that all students should take a public speaking class in college. They're saying there's no relationship at all. And if we start with that premise and we test it and there is a relationship, then of course we've found something. So we always have a null as well, no difference. And then we have what I like. I'm not fond of making hypothesis and pre-predicting. I like to let the question just kind of float and see what the data is going to do. So I like research questions. Most of my research has been done using research questions. It's a question asking about variables of interest. I want to know what effect communication competence, empathy, and leadership style have on student learning outcomes, student learning satisfaction. So I just showed you a research question that put all 3 variables. I want to know about communication competence, leadership, and empathy. Does that impact my students' learning satisfaction if I have those? So I can do that. I give you an example. Do men talk more than women in mixed settings? I'm asking a very specific question. Non-directional research questions, I really want us to stay away from because they're almost too broad. It just says, is there, that should say difference, typo, is there a difference in the way women and men talk? And it's not telling us that much. What do you mean difference? Difference in the way they argue, difference in the way they solve conflict, what? So this research question down here is almost too broad. We want to actually include and name variables if we can in our research questions. So pretty easy there. All right, so a lot of review here, and I've brought in some new things that might even be a little first time you're seeing them with the scales. But you are going to do a variable activity, and let me show you. This is the paper you will be working on this week. It should also remind you of 350 because honestly, it's the same worksheet I use in 350. So you are going to have to identify the independent and dependent variable. Then I want you to write in your research teams 5 questions, research questions, and identify the independent and dependent variables. You're then going to write 5 hypotheses and identify the independent and dependent variables. And you will submit I have group names on here. I'm going to cut that off. You will submit these individually, but you can work at them in your groups to help you. So, wow, let me fix my spelling errors while I'm here. Oh, stingers, that was not good. Strangers. They still don't like it. Oh my gosh, what are you gonna do with me? All right, so these are the things that we're working on. Variables, chapter 6. The most confusing part, I know, is this measurement stuff. But remember, here's what I want you to know. Nominal is a category. Ordinal is rank order. Interval is that full scale. It has equidistant levels between each category where you are then putting your answer or your level. Most of the scales we want are interval. Why? We get more sophisticated statistical data by using interval level variables. Ratio. I do want you to know that there are ratio variables. They're the same as interval, but with a true 0. And I'm really not going to say much more than that because we honestly don't use ratio variables very much. Most all of the variables we use in comm research are interval. We talked about Likert scales or Likert scales. Those are pre-numbered scales with multiple statements that measure the concept. How many questions do you need to measure a concept accurately? At least 3. I prefer 5, but 3 is the minimum. We showed you the semantic differential scale, which uses opposite worded adjectives. We can use those. And we showed you a staple scale that looked at the pluses 5s and the minuses 5s toward a topic with a set of adjectives. So these are all interval level data. Okay, all interval level data. Where is most of the nominal data going to appear in your survey? Honestly, that's in demographics. That's where your nominal and ordinal data is going to occur. The bulk of your survey is going to be interval data. Again, asking multiple questions. So, since we're here and we're on the video and we're having such a freaking good time, let's go back to your module real quick and take a look at the student survey, because while we still have much to learn about making surveys and we're not there yet, I do want you to see what's going on here. So their first one, remember, was answering the following questions about how you interact in public. And they've got 10 questions measuring this. They're using a Likert scale. This is interval level data. Maintenance of relationships. They've got a good number of questions measuring that. They've redone the scale. We can answer these easily. Interval level data. This is some questions about family relationships. Again, multiple questions. Now, this is the demographic section. This is where you're going to find interval and ordinal and nominal. Ordinal and nominal in your demographic section. So age, sex, do you have a form of employment? Are you enrolled in school? And 2, other number of siblings, number of family members. And you can make these questions up. So most of your nominal and ordinal data is in the demographic section. The majority of your survey should be interval level. All right. Hopefully I have not made you terribly confused about these variables or hypotheses. We are going to practice that in this activity. You'll identify those dependent and independent, and you will also write some of your own. Please do everything in your power to make them communication related. So keep that idea in your head of how communication impacts things. And make sure you're writing questions and then hypotheses. All right, I hope that was crystal clear. I was a little tongue-tied this morning, but I think it was a good review, and you've got the activity to help you along, as well as chapter 6. All right, guys, that's enough for today. Talk to you soon.